from the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate-level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English, winner of the Southern Oregon Television Award, Program of the Year, and the Best Education Show in 2017. I'm the producer and host, John Letts. Ramping Up Your English is an instructional support program for intermediate-level English learners. Now, if you've already passed those beginning stages of learning English and you want to reach higher levels of English proficiency, this program is designed to meet your needs and get you closer to your goal. Ramping Up Your English is for English learners from all language backgrounds and for people of all ages. We take a content-based approach to helping you reach higher levels of English proficiency. Our current thematic unit is Native Americans. This is segment 1 of episode 85. In our last episode, we heard from Dr. Bruce Huckle about the people of the Folsom culture. In this unit, we'll listen to many stories. We ask who is telling the story and why are they telling it. Professor Huckle, an archaeologist in New Mexico, who has studied the physical clues left behind from people who lived there thousands of years ago. He's telling the story of linking that physical evidence with learning about the people who used a different style of spear point than the older Clovis culture. Now, forming hypotheses and theories from physical evidence is a science-based approach to understanding the world in which we live. Thus, I can say that the professor is seeking truth and sharing what he's learned. He also confessed that his knowledge is limited, that the evidence can't really prove who the ancestors of the Folsom people were or the descendants. You know, it's an intriguing story that he tells. Now let's listen to another story. This one is not science-based, although a great many years of observation were invested by the author. In an earlier episode, we shared the first chapter of Indian Tales by Jaime de Angulo. De Angulo spent 40 years living among the Pitt River Indians in Northern California. He wrote Indian tales for his young children. Furthermore, he made sure his stories reflected the truth about the values and customs of the Pitt River tribe. So in his own way, his story is about seeking and sharing truth. Today we'll share the second chapter when we left off the last time. This family of bear, antelope, fox, and baby quail had just gone to sleep after a day of traveling toward the coast. Let's listen to what happens in this short chapter. The next morning, Bear woke up early, long before the sun was up. It was the very beginning of the break of dawn when Bear sat up and started to sing. He was singing softly to himself, sort of humming. Then he got up and stretched himself and went to the spring to wash his face. He started a campfire while it was yet all dark. Then he started to cook breakfast. He was heating stones, small, round stones. "Mother, what was he singing? Who is that man," he said, "was coming over the mountains from the east, singing with the daylight?" "Oh, he was singing about his shadow. That song is what the shadow sings. Your shadow also. You must make him sing that way in the morning. Everyone's shadow comes home in the dawn, singing like that." "What do you mean, comes home?" "Sure, he comes home to you, your shadow does. You are his home." "But where has he been?" "Oh, he's been going around during the night, visiting, going places, and in the morning he comes home to you." "Does he always come?" "No. Sometimes he gets lost. That's why your father was singing. We are in a strange place. His shadow might be wandering around looking for him. But if the shadow hears him singing, he says to himself, "Oh, that's me over there. That's where I belong." And if he gets lost, what happens then? Well, then you get sick and you die. You can't keep living without your shadow. Fox Boy thought a moment. Then he said, "But Father is not going to die because he's singing and his shadow must have heard him. I'd better sing too so my shadow will hear me." Do you think you can remember the song? Listen, we'll sing it together. The words are, I'm coming over the mountains, I come home. I'm coming, with the daylight I come home. I'm coming, from the east I come home. Now look, we'd better get up and help Bear cook breakfast. So they got up and washed their faces at the spring. Then Antelope took some acorn flour and made a mush. Then she picked up some hot stones from the fire with a couple of sticks and dropped them into the mush, which was in a small basket. The hot stones made a hissing sound. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Pretty soon the mush was bubbling and boiling. Little Fox Boy couldn't wait. He put his 2 fingers in the mush. "Ouch!" he yelled, jumping up and down, shaking his fingers. Well, why don't you wait and let it cool a little? Nobody is going to take it away from you. Take your time, take your time. It never was that people couldn't wait a minute. Watch me, watch how I do it. Now Antelope deftly scooped some mush with her fingers, 2 of her fingers, and licked them off. Quickly, just like that. "That's the way to do it," she said. "Oh, I can do that myself," said Fox. He was so quick that he smeared his nose with the mush, and they all laughed. Breakfast over, they rolled up their things, shouldered their packs, and started traveling again. Tross, tross, tross up the trail. Tross, tross, tross down the trail. Tross, tross, tross along the trail. They traveled all day, and that night they made their camp by a little stream. And Fox Little Boy crawled in between Bear and Antelope under the rabbit skin blanket and was soon fast asleep. You're watching Ramping Up Your English. This is episode 2, segment 2 of episode 85. And we learned a few things in this chapter. We learned how people with baskets are able to heat their meals. We learned something about beliefs concerning a person's shadow. We'll share more from Indian Tales in subsequent episodes. For now, be sure to remember this whole thing about a person's shadow. It'll be important in another section we'll share. Now, these stories follow the tradition of talking animals, a tradition reaching to fairly recent times. Let's add to the chronological walk we're taking through prehistoric times to the epic migration and subsequent developments of the first Americans. Our study of America's first people takes us back thousands of years. Let's watch this video that traces this epic migration across continents and years beyond counting. Following large game through the shoulders of massive ice sheets, the first Americans arrived on the continent as far back as 30,000 years ago. For millennia, these huge animals would sustain the hunters and gatherers who crossed the land bridge we call Beringia, leaving Asia for this new land, America. At some places, they left behind the tools of their hunting trade as they refined the manufacture of hunting points. The oldest human DNA was discovered by archaeologists at Paisley Caves, proof that humans were here at least 14,000 years ago.
What was the rest of the world doing 14,000 years ago? Many were following the same megafauna, living in family groups like these early Americans. Agriculture in the Golden Crescent had not happened yet. Neither had the ancient Egyptian Empire. Jesus of Nazareth was not yet born, nor were Buddha or Muhammad. Ancient China had not yet begun the lengthy dynasties that would vie for power there. The Roman Empire would not exist for thousands of years. Nor did any of these things exist when the Clovis point was adopted far and wide in the Americas. The Folsom culture was also far in the past, at 11,000 years ago. No Roman Empire, no Christians, no London, no Paris. Early Americans truly discovered uninhabited areas, some ever moving into places where no one else had ever lived. While oceans were low due to a big freeze-up, some returned to Asia without the knowledge they had ever been somewhere else. As the planet warmed, more areas became habitable, new land available for these first Americans. By 10,000 years ago, sea levels rise enough to flood the Beringia land bridge. No more walking from Asia to America. Mammoths, mastodons, and huge bison still lived in the much wetter Southwest, but soon they go extinct. Other animals are pursued with a development in technology, the use of the atlatl, at this time used in the Southwest. About 1,000 years later, around the year 7,560 BC, an American we call the Kennewick Man died along the Columbia River, leaving one of the most complete early Native American skeletons. This is what Kennewick Man's face may have looked like in this reconstruction. DNA testing showed him to be an ancestor of the Nez Perce and other Columbia River groups. 9,000 years ago, deer, nuts, and grains became the main food source in the Northeast as the climate continued to warm. By 8,000 years ago, with the disappearance of mammoths, mastodons, and other megafauna, other animals emerged to thrive in this warming climate. For animals and people alike, living conditions changed drastically over a relatively short time, making adaptation essential. 8,000 years ago also saw early Americans hunting different animals, those in the north hunting caribou, while nowhere near the size of mammoths. Caribou grow to considerable size. Only 300 years later, the volcano Mount Mazama erupted, a cataclysmic event that resulted in today's Crater Lake. Millennia later, tribes in the area relate this event in their oral traditions. 7,000 years ago, early cultivation of food crops began in Mesoamerica, while Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest developed an economy based on salmon. The old copper culture around the Great Lakes used copper to make knives, axes, and other tools and pendants. And this is 2,000 years before ancient Egypt, way before ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, or the Reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula. There's a lot we don't know about these early Americans. What kind of thoughts did they have? What values did they hold? What kinds of religious beliefs and practices did they have? We'll never be able to ask them, but we can learn from their descendants. While the giant bison of the megafauna era had passed into extinction, its smaller but still large cousin continued to populate much of the continent. 5,500 years ago, tribal people had various means of hunting them. Head-smashed-in buffalo jump in Alberta, Canada, is the site where buffalo were startled into a bunch and then stampeded to their death at the ledge. Survivors were clubbed by people waiting at the base of the cliff. 5,500 years ago, Indians in Louisiana began building mounds. Now, the oldest of these discovered so far are at a site called Watson Brake, located in the northeast segment of the state. The discovery and excavation of Watson Brake has caused researchers to think again about earlier assumptions that only when people practice agriculture would they develop ceremonial and trade centers. Watson Brake was constructed over centuries of time. The human-made earthen mounds, the oldest such complex in North America. Its makers were not farmers, but hunter-gatherers. Such complex construction indicates social complexity, capable of planning and contracting massive projects over many generations of time. When Watson Brake was constructed, neither the Egyptian pyramids nor Stonehenge existed. Agriculture began in North America 5,000 years ago, in what archaeologists call the late Archaic period. In the South, it was sunflowers and marsh elder. In the Northeast, it was amaranth. These were ground up as seeds to make flour. Meanwhile, in the Southwest, cultivation began of the three sisters, corn from Mesoamerica, beans, and squash. By now, there was an extensive trade network that saw copper in places far from the Great Lakes, that area where it was mined and processed. This system of trade apparently went on for thousands of years. When the Watson Brake mounds were discovered and researched, the timeline for mound builder societies had to be reset. Until Watson Brake's, the earliest mound builders were believed to be at Poverty Point, a site that's also in northeast Louisiana. The Poverty Point site was occupied from 4,000 years ago to around 3,000 years ago. As with Watson Brake 2,000 years earlier, Poverty Point's mounds were constructed over several generations. 400 years, that's 25 generations. The Poverty Point culture extended 100 miles across the Mississippi Delta and south to the Gulf of Mexico. The site was on the edge of the Mississippi River. Poverty Point was built and inhabited by hunter-gatherers, not farmers. Their food was acquired through fishing, gathering, and hunting. They lived on deer, small mammals, fish, turtles, nuts, fruits, and berries. Poverty Point Indians left millions of artifacts that have been recovered and studied by archaeologists. They include human figurines and instruments made from bone and imported rock. One unusual item is this weight for use on an atlatl. Poverty Point was built on Macon Ridge and covers over 400 acres. At a time when most Americans lived in small groups, Poverty Point had a considerable population, described as the largest and most complex late archaic earthwork occupation and ceremonial site yet found in North America. This plaza area was ringed with pole structures marked with white barrels today, built, it seems, for gatherings. Poverty Point is a national monument and a World Heritage Site. started 5,500 years ago.
You're watching Ramping Up Your English. This is segment 3 of episode 85. Now, we've traced the story of the first Americans from their arrival to many changes that they were forced to make over thousands of years that they and their ancestors lived in North America. We'll learn more about those cities in the East in our episodes that follow. Now, some of the descendants from the first Americans were the Algonquian people of the Great Lakes area. One legend of the Algonquians is Little Firefly, written and adapted by Terry Colleen. Now I'll share just a taste of what you'll see if you want to read more. So among the birches surrounding the great woodland lake, there once lived an Algonquian girl named Little Firefly. She lived in a bark wigwam with her father and 2 other sisters. Now, for days at a time, their father would hunt. "You must teach Little Firefly the skills of a woman," he would say to the older girls each time he left them. But her sisters hated looking after Little Firefly and made her do most of the work. They often pushed her into the fire, leaving her skin puckered with scars, her hair singed and broken, her eyes red from smoke. Instead of using her name, everyone called her Little Burnt One. Well, one day, Little Firefly was mashing berries when 2 of the older girls came up to the wigwam and they were arguing. "You did not see him," said the oldest. "You only saw his paddle and canoe as I did. I guessed his bowstring was deer sinew and hunting strap was a beaver tail." "Indeed, I did see him," claimed the second sister. "His bowstring was twisted nettle, and his hunting strap was the neck skin of a snapping turtle. That woman thought I was too beautiful, and that's why she sent me away." "Who sent you away?" asked Little Firefly. "The Invisible One and his sister, who live across the lake, if it's any business of yours." Well, little Firefly knew the Invisible One was a great hunter whose guardian spirit had given him the gift of becoming invisible. He could only be seen by his sister and one day his bride. So that's how the story starts. Do you have an idea how things might unfold in this legend? You may be thinking of a story that starts in a similar way. Perhaps you have a general idea of where the story may go. Well, one way to find out for sure is to read the book, Little Firefly, an Algonquian legend. It's written and adapted by Terry Colleen and illustrated by Charles Reasoner. It's published by Watermill Press. I'll have the IBSN of this book on my website. I love to hear from viewers, and you can send me email that way at letscreatepro@gmail.com. Be sure to visit my website, letscreate.org, to see the support materials for this episode, including the videos we feature. Click on the link to the Native American unit on the home page and navigate to the episode 85 page. You can watch and even download this episode and more from archive.org/details/roguetv. All episodes are there. Enter Ramping Up Your English in the search box and choose the episode you want. Ramping Up Your English can be seen on RVTV on Channel 15 and 115 on the Ashland Home Network and on Channel 182 in the rest of Southern Oregon on Charter Cable. You can stream Ramping Up Your English for free from rvtv.sou.edu. I want to thank my director, Denise Ross, and my talented and dedicated crew, and I want to thank you, our viewers. All of you help make this program an award winner. Join me next time for Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.